What's going on, everyone? Today is January 3rd, 2023. Welcome back to this edition of the Superstream number 45. Well, it just so happens that Super Bowl 45 was won by the Green Bay Packers, and much like the last live stream, the Packers will be the topic of conversation in today's live stream. Now, I don't want anyone to get too excited because they've won 2 games since my last live stream. However, has the narrative changed behind the Packers? When I did my last live stream, the team was still virtually down and out. However, that following week, all 5 games went the Packers' way, and now they sit in control of their own destiny. And you've heard Jim Nantz and Tony Romo on CBS, if you watched the game this past weekend, how they were hyping up Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, and it really sounds like they're going to make some sort of run here. So we'll talk about that theme. We're going to talk a lot about Vince Lombardi, how his death was actually connected to John Lennon. And this is relevant because Aaron Rodgers played the Green Bay Packers' first ever game in London on Lennon's birthday earlier this year. So we'll cover that. We'll cover Jeremiah Green, the drummer for Modest Mouse, who has reportedly died from cancer at the young age of 45. And how that connects to Vince Lombardi. Also, Pope Benedict XVI passing away on New Year's Eve, December 31st, just one day before this massive Jesus riddle with Minnesota and Green Bay. Really one of the most amazing alignments pre-game for anything I've ever seen. Before we talk about this year's Super Bowl riddle and everything that's been going on with the Packers and the Vikings, I do want to cover this story that happened last night. Now, part of the reason it took me so long to go live after my last video, now I did take a break for a few days over the holidays, but the blog has been as active as ever. And every time I've wanted to go live, there was a new news story related to what I was talking about with all the same numerology, and it just kept piling up. But again, before I get into that, let's quickly touch on this Damar Hamlin story. And for those of you who may not have heard, during last night's Bills-Bengals game in the first quarter, Hamlin was attempting to make a tackle when he took a shoulder into the chest, a really stiff hit. And he got up, but then suddenly collapsed, stayed down, and it was bad enough that they had to administer CPR. They took him to the hospital. Apparently, his vitals are doing okay, and it sounds like he's going to make it. So, prayers for anyone injured there. But I want to talk about how this was also by the numbers, and whether it's whether anything is real or fake or staged, there's going to be numerology behind it, whether it's organic or manufactured. In the case of the NFL, what we often see, I believe, is that people are placed in certain positions by the numbers. And if there's evil intent behind that action, then something like this could very well manifest. And what we're beginning to see here in 2023 is a number of skull and bones riddles. And this kicked off on New Year's Day immediately. But this is another one. And this all ties into Yale University, which is where the Skull and Bones Secret Society is headquartered. This is the year 2023, and of course the Skull and Bones Secret Society uses 322 and the image on their emblem. And what makes this so special this year is that Yale University will be 322 years old in October. Last night, the Buffalo Bills player who got injured, Damar Hamlin. Notice how this happened 9 months and 7 days before the anniversary of Yale University, 9/7. The Buffalo Bills were founded on a date with numerology of 97. This is the gematria of the word death. When you write out Damar Hamlin plus his number, the number 3, which he wears, you get another 97. Skull and Bones has the logo Skull and Crossbones. They're also known as the Brotherhood of Death, both summoned in 97. 97 is a prime number, the 25th. And notice how death also equals 25. Also found in the numerology of the Bills' founding. Measuring to Damar Hamlin's next birthday, you get 2 months and 23 days. And in the standard alphabetic order, Skull and Crossbones sums to 223. And when I saw this name, Damar Hamlin, doesn't that remind you of a NASCAR driver with a very similar name, Denny Hamlin? And would you believe that Denny Hamlin was born on November 18th, which is the 322nd day of the year, the very number that sits on the Skull and Bones logo. In standard Gematria, the number 93 has 322 in its value. And this brings us to the next part of this riddle, which is connected to the planet Saturn. Now, I haven't talked about the English Kabbalah method of Gematria in a long time, but it is relevant when we talk about Saturn. A large reason of this is because time equals 93 in this method. And it's often said that Saturn is the keeper of time. And in the alphabetic order, the planet Saturn sums to 93, just like time in the Kabbalah. And check this out. Damar Hamlin was injured at 8:55 Eastern. 8:55. This 9:25 is also relevant, but this 8:55 is so important. When he was hurt, there were 5 minutes and 58 seconds left on the clock. 558. In ancient Sumerian Gematria, the planet Saturn sums to 558. This method takes the alphabetic order, multiplying it by 6, and consider how Saturn is the 6th planet from the Sun. So this number 558 commonly coded into Saturn. In fact, recall how Aaron Rodgers has this Gematria, 558 in standard Gematria. And twice in his career, he's suffered a broken collarbone, which equals 558. But this is what trips me out, is that I saw this video from a doctor, and I've seen this guy before. He makes videos after there's injuries during a sports game. And he broke it down, and what he explained happened is that this was something called commotio cordis, and it requires someone to be struck in the heart at a particular time during their heartbeat. And based on this is what caused him to collapse. And when you write out commotio cordis, it sums to 558. So with 558 on the clock, this means that 9 minutes and 2 seconds had elapsed in the game. 9:02. You could also say that this was the 9th minute and 3rd second. 9:03. And this brings us back to Saturn in ordinal. 93. The Buffalo Bills organization was 1,558 days after its Saturn return, and also 9 weeks, 3 days after its anniversary. Again, measuring to the same date that the Buffalo Bills were established, which I pointed out at the top of the post. Damar Hamlin was born on March 24th of 1998. And check out the lunation number. This means Hamlin was born during lunation number 930, representing the number 93. And when he entered last night's game, he had a total number of tackles of 93, including assists. And then you look at his age last night, and he was exactly 1,293 weeks old. Look at that, 93, once again. Consider how 93 has the same gematria as ritual sacrifice and Saturnalia. And then to top it off, Damar Hamlin sums to 94. So there is something called the rule of Kalel, and I very rarely talk about this because it opens up the door to play with numbers, right? But not only does he have the 94 syncing up with 93, but also the 224. And consider how this is a Skull and Bones ritual connected to 223, the second day of 2023. There's a whole lot more here to unpack as well. Saturnalia, the festival celebrated by sacrifice, sums to 116. The Bills were founded on a date with 116 numerology, and measuring from the date that this man was drafted to the date of the game was 611 days. The NASCAR driver, Denny Hamlin, has gematria of 119, very similar. We'll talk a lot about these numbers today. The score was 7-3. Consider how that syncs up with Saturn, Saturnalia, and Sacrifice. And also, think about the number he wore, number 3. Now, the last time I remember seeing something like this on television, it resulted in a death, and that was with Dale Earnhardt, where everyone was very silent after it happened. No one knew what was going on. And it turns out that he passed away. Well, this year is 21 years since Dale Earnhardt died in 2001. And if you measure from the date that Earnhardt died, you see last night is still 21 years later. Furthermore, Hamlin was taken as the 212th pick in the draft. And in the Kabbalah, this is the Gematria of ritual sacrifice, 212. The number 3 is matched between Hamlin and Saturn. They were playing the Cincinnati Bengals, which lines up with Saturn. In reverse reduction, Saturn equals 42, and this game was 42 days before Super Bowl 57, and the name Hamlin equals 57. So does cardiac arrest. Dale Earnhardt, 57. Number 3, 57. So something definitely behind this, as always, a very strong numeric ritual, or spell, I guess we could say. So moving on from this, I want to talk about this big Super Bowl riddle that's playing out in front of us now. And guys, this will be a long video. I'll tell you right now, I've done over 20 posts since my last live stream. Most of those having to do with the Super Bowl, the Packers, the Vikings, so we'll be covering all of these as we go. It'd be nice if my blog would load a little quicker so we could get rolling on this, but I actually made a post on December 28th assuring my readers that these Super Bowl posts, this obsession I've had with the Packers and Super Bowl 57 will end soon. However, that didn't exactly happen because not only the things on the field have played out in favor of Green Bay, but every time I check the news, I see a new news story that syncs up with Green Bay and the Super Bowl. Before I get to those, let's take a step back. In my last live stream, I explained at depth how this year's Super Bowl is a riddle connected to the musician Prince. Prince Rodgers Nelson. So we talked a lot about that and how Prince syncs up with this arch eclipse that started over Green Bay and Minnesota back in 2021. You'll see the path of annularity started just north of the United States, just north of these two NFC North rivals. Well, what's so fascinating about this eclipse, June 10th, 2021, is that this actually fell on the 100th birthday of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. This man was the husband of Queen Elizabeth, who died on the first day of this year's NFL season. So you'll see he was born on June 10th, 1921. And this is important because the name Prince Rodgers Nelson sums to 100 in reduction. And the same year that Prince died, 2016, was the same year that the Vikings opened up their new stadium. And the very first touchdown at that stadium was from Rodgers to Nelson. Just like Prince is named Prince Rodgers Nelson. These are coincidences that are a little bit too strong to believe sometimes, aren't they? So let's talk about this St. Louis Arch, the Gateway Arch, which opened up to the public in 1967, and how it connects to this arch eclipse. Now, Prince Philip did not make it to his 100th birthday. He died on the 99th day of year at the age of 99. Including the end date, he died 63 days before this arch eclipse. And 63 is a very important number to the Gateway Arch, which is 630 feet tall and 630 feet wide. Notice how the arch equals 63 in the alphabetic order. 3 days before the opening of the arch, Prince would have turned 63 years old. And check out how the name Prince Nelson equals 63 in both reduction methods. So does arch eclipse. Pole eclipse equals 63, and so do the last two Packers quarterbacks. So if you measure from this arch eclipse, June 10th of 2021, back to the opening of the Gateway Arch. Well, look at this. Inaugurated on June 10th of 1967, which was exactly 54 years before this eclipse. Sun equals 54, arch is 54, sun arch is 54. Not only that, however, if you measure from the birthday of Vince Lombardi, the legendary head coach of the Green Bay Packers, to the date of the opening of the Gateway Arch, it was a span of exactly 54 years. Green Bay equals 540, Packer equals 54, the moon 540, and then Archie equals 504. So think about this again and how strong this is. Vince Lombardi, born a span of exactly 54 years before the Gateway Arch, which opened exactly 54 years before the eclipse over Green Bay. This connection will be extremely solidified as we go. Now, measuring from the first Super Bowl to the date that the arch opened was 147 days, and Super Bowl equals 1407 in Gematria. Notice how the Gateway Arch opened on a date with 102 numerology. The first Super Bowl was also held on a date with 102 numerology. So was the second, in fact. And this is wild because consider how his full name, Vincent Thomas Lombardi, sums to 102 with the S exception. And Lombardi won Super Bowls 1 and 2. 1-2. So I mentioned the name Archie. And the name Archie is the name of the newest royal baby, Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor. And he's only 3 years old, born in 2019. Notice how Archie equals 106, just like the date 10-6. The Packers also 106. Prince died exactly 610 sidereal months, or lunar orbits, after Vince Lombardi, 610, just like the date of this eclipse, 610. So you could also say it was the first day of the 611th lunar orbit. 611. That's the birthday of Vince Lombardi. And something called satanic gematria, which is a cipher that's constructed around the number 666. 666 is the 36th triangular number. That's where this cipher begins. If you add 6 plus 6 plus 6, you get 18. And the 18th prime is where this cipher ends. Satanic gematria sums to 666 in this method. And in that method, ritual human sacrifice equals 911, and blood sacrifice is 611. From the date that Prince performed at the Super Bowl to the date he died was exactly 9 years, 11 weeks. Prince was born exactly 60 years, 11 months before Prince Archie. 611, just like Vince Lombardi's birthday. Now, Lombardi died in 197 weeks before the Super Bowl. Prince equals 197. And look at the gematria of Packers. 1097 and 1907, the same 4 digits as Lombardi's death. Arch eclipse, moon, Charles III, Queen, and Mary, all with 197 gematria. But when we talk about 197, this is a number connected to the Metonic cycle. The Metonic cycle is a period of 19 years, 7 of which have a 13th month. And in Gematria, Metonic cycle equals 197, 19 years, 197, 13th month, 197. The Metonic cycle is made up of exactly 235 lunar phases. And if you measure from the birth of Archie Mountbatten Windsor to the Arch eclipse, you get 2 years and 35 days. And his full name, Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor, sums to 2305. Also, when Prince died, he was 235 days older than Vince Lombardi was when he died. I have so much to cover in this video. I think I'm going to take a break on this particular post for now. And let's talk more about this eclipse, because the Packers have actually been paying tribute to this eclipse right in front of us. And the symbolism is quite clear. Before I explain this, I want to talk about the overarching riddle of perfection. And back on November 30th, we had the death of Christine McVie. And this was a death that had everything to do with perfect numbers. Oh man, I've been posting a lot lately. Huh. So Christine McVie died on November 30th. And when you measure from November 30th, 2022, to the Super Bowl, you get 74 days. It's actually not the number I was looking for. The point I'm making here is that her name was Christine Perfect. Oh, here we go. When you measure from her death to the next Great American Total Solar Eclipse, you get 496 days with the end date. And 496 is a perfect number. Just the third perfect number. And Christine Perfect dying 496 days before that eclipse. Since she died, the Packers have not lost a game. They've been perfect. And they must continue to go perfect through the Super Bowl. So this is something I picked up on before my last stream. But let's take a rewind here. Back in 2011, after the Packers won their last Super Bowl, they started out the next season perfect. And at 11-0, they went to New York and traveled to play the Giants. And notice how they won by a score of 38-35. Now, this means there were 73 points in the game. And that stood out even at the time because perfect equals 73. And this game was with the Packers, 73. 4 years later, the perfect Carolina Panthers went into New York and also won 38-35, remaining perfect. And look at how Carolina equals 73, just like perfect, 73 points. Remember, the Giants were the same team to end the first ever perfect season in modern NFL history when the New England Patriots lost their first game in the Super Bowl to the Giants. But in the last game of that season, the Patriots beat the Giants 38-35 for a perfect season. So why do I talk about this here? Well, in 2020, the Packers played the Panthers. So these were the last two perfect teams in the NFL. Or the last two teams with the longest perfect records, I should say. And during this game, Rodgers scored a rushing touchdown. And he had this crown celebration where teammates put a crown on his head. And this all points to the crown eclipse over the North Pole. Notice how the word crown equals 73, 703, and 1073. Well, this crowning was 173 days before the crown eclipse. And Aaron Rodgers wears number 12, which equals 173 and 1730. So this game, this crowning of Aaron Rodgers, was 112 weeks before the Super Bowl. In the reverse alphabetic order, Super Bowl equals 112. This year's Super Bowl is played on the 112th meridian in Phoenix. And it'll be just barely a week after Ronald Reagan turns 112 years old. And I bring up Ronald Reagan because Ronald Reagan was born on February 6th of 1911, which means Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers won Super Bowl 45 on his 100th birthday, February 6th, 2011. On the 100th birthday of Ronald Reagan, February 6th, 1911. And think about how we just talked about 100 with Prince. Prince Philip, 100 years old for the crown eclipse. So the first ever game between Green Bay and Carolina took place in the NFC Championship game back in 1997. And the date of that game was 1/12, January 12th. And look at the score of that game. 30-13. 30-13. Well, that game was played exactly 313 months before this year's Super Bowl. 3-1-3. I mean, this is crazy. Look at this. 1/12 of 97. when they first ever squared off to the Super Bowl. 313 months on the dot, just like the score of the game. But what if we instead use weeks? 1,361 weeks. When you write out the number 57, it sums to 1,361. Now, I've been theorizing that the Bills are a likely opponent for the Packers. I'm not going to get too deep into this, but the last Super Bowl that the Bills played in finished with a score of 30-13, Super Bowl 28. And to get to that Super Bowl, the Bills won a game 30-13 over the Chiefs. I brought this up in my last live stream. The Colts and Vikings comeback was exactly 313 weeks after their game in 2016, very similar. Remember, Pope Francis began his papacy on 313. Huge Catholic Jesuit riddles with this year's Super Bowl as well. This next part of the video, we're going to talk about Vince Lombardi a little more in depth. And, wow, I wish my blog would load faster. You know, we have new servers that are much faster for everything you're doing on the calculator and the date calculator, but I think there's a plugin still on the blog that might be causing some issues. I'll have to look into that. All right, so in 1970, the winner of the first two Super Bowls, Vince Lombardi, passed away after a short, sudden battle with cancer. What I'm going to do in this decode is explain to you how important Saros cycles are. What is a Saros cycle? So a Saros cycle tells us when we're going to get the next solar or lunar eclipse. At any given time, there are anywhere from about 35 to 40 active Saros cycles. Eclipses from the same Saros are separated by 223 lunar phases. And here we are in the year 2023. Very significant Saros year. And these Saros series are numbered. Every eclipse belongs to a particular Saros. So, on my calculator, for instance, for enthusiast and mystic members, you'll see the brown lunation as well as the Saros cycle of any eclipses on that date. And I wish I began paying more attention to these sooner, because these riddles are absolutely, completely centered around these Saros numbers. So let's explain how this works with Vince Lombardi, who might be one of the best examples ever. Remember, Vince Lombardi was born on the 11th of June, or 11/6. The first ever Super Bowl that he won fell 6 months, 11 days after Independence Day. And we're going to talk a lot about how Vince Lombardi is connected to the American flag and the Star-Spangled Banner. Remember, this is a riddle for the national anthem. Consider how national anthem equals 57. And here we are, about to have Super Bowl 57. Remember when Colin Kaepernick first kneeled for the national anthem back in 2016? It was against the Green Bay Packers. Remember that. So it looks like all of this is coming to a head for this year. So Vince Lombardi, born on 6/11, or 11/6. And he was the coach of the Packers. Notice how Packers equals 116, and now they're involved in this perfection riddle. The word perfect, also 116. And I can't think of a sports figure that is venerated in such a fashion as Vince Lombardi, whereas in Green Bay, he's basically seen as a saint. People will literally dress up in Pope gear, go to the game, honoring Vince Lombardi. It's kind of creepy, actually. But look at how Saint Vince equals 116. In fact, Saint Vince Lombardi also equals 116. The Star-Spangled Banner was adopted as the national anthem 116 years after the poem was written. And consider how this all ties into his star quarterback. Vince Lombardi's star quarterback was Bart Starr. The guy's name was Starr. And this is all going to tie into our star, the sun. So, Solar Saros 116 is what this is all tied to. The reason is because this is the first Saros series to end in, I think, like 30 years. Notice how the last eclipse of Saros 116 was in 1971, just a year after Vince Lombardi died. Measuring from the death of Vince Lombardi on September 3rd of 1970 to the date of this eclipse, the last eclipse of Saros 116, 46 weeks. What am I looking at? Yeah, 322 days. Look at that. I didn't even make this connection originally. 322. Here we are in 2023. 46 weeks, that's sacrifice. 46. But look instead at this. 10 months and 19 days. Very similar to the digits in 116. Vince died on the date leaving 119 days in the year. And this final eclipse from Saros 116 fell on a date with 119 numerology. Consider how Lombardi won Super Bowls 1 and 2. Notice how 1 and 2 sums to 1190. So, let's look at Solar Saros 119 and see how it connects to that. We will in a minute, I guess, but first, notice how Vince Lombardi died. I'm sorry, guys. Vince Lombardi was born exactly 91 years, 1 week before the release of the film Dodgeball. And we need to touch on this Dodgeball riddle once again. Remember how Prince died 9 years, 11 weeks after performing at the Super Bowl? If we measure from the death of Vince Lombardi to the most recent eclipse from Solar Saros 119, which was in 1968, just 2 years before his death. Notice how he died exactly 127 weeks after the eclipse from Saros 119. In ordinal, the name Vince Lombardi sums to 127. In fact, he was pronounced dead at 7:12 a.m. Consider how the Packers logo is a G, like the emblem of Freemasonry. Scottish Rite of Freemasonry comes to 127. The Scottish Rite of Freemasonry was founded on June 24th, which is the same date that Vince Lombardi was originally diagnosed with cancer. And notice how Solar Saros 119 ends on June 24th. Freemasonry's anniversary, 6/24. Lombardi was diagnosed exactly 142 years before this eclipse, the last of 119. And the name Lombardi equals 142. Crown eclipse 142. So does eclipse sacrifice 142. And speaking of potential eclipse sacrifices, former Packers executive Ted Thompson died in January of 2021. He died in Atlanta, Texas. And this happened the same weekend that Hank Aaron, who used to play baseball in Wisconsin, died in Atlanta, Georgia. Ted Thompson died 142 days before the Crown eclipse. Crown eclipse 142. Eclipse sacrifice 142. So, this riddle is so crazy. The first draft after Vince Lombardi died, the 1971 NFL draft, the Packers selected a quarterback named Lynn Dickey. And I've talked about the symbolism that Freemasonry and the Jesuits seem to like with annular eclipses. It has something to do with homosexuality. I don't know. This is a strange name, right? Lynn Dickey. It's not even his real first name. It's Clifford, but I'll talk about that in a second. So Vince Lombardi dies, and 21 weeks later, the Packers draft a guy named Lynn Dickey. Notice how Lynn Dickey was born on 10/19/119. And his full name, Clifford Lynn Dickey, equals 1109. In fact, Lynn Dickey was even drafted on a date with 119 numerology. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because Lynn Dickey was the last quarterback for the Packers to wear number 12 until Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers won his first Super Bowl on a date with 12 numerology. This year's Super Bowl also has 12 numerology. And consider how, Vince Lombardi won Super Bowls 1 and 2. Well, now Brett Favre won 1 Super Bowl, and now Aaron Rodgers is trying to win 2. But here's where it gets really crazy. The name Dickey equals 57. Again, this is the year of Super Bowl 57. And Super Bowl 57 falls on a date with 57 numerology. It's also the date leaving 322 days in 2023. In the alphabetic order, Moon equals 57, with its 57-degree range of declination. In Hebrew, Moon equals 223. When Vince Lombardi died, he was 57 years, 2 months, and 23 days old. His life and death connected to the national anthem 57. Remember the number 116, which was so vital to his death. 116 equals 223. What else equals 223? The Star-Spangled Banner, 223. Vince Lombardi won the first Super Bowl when America was 190 years old. And that's the ordinal value of Star-Spangled Banner without the. This quarterback, Lynn Dickey, notice how he will be 73 years and 116 days old for the Super Bowl. Those are the same 2 numbers found in the Gematria of Packers and Perfect. In fact, his real first name, Clifford, also 73. When Rodgers won his first Super Bowl, Dickey was 61 years, 111 days, and Aaron Rodgers has 116 birth numerology. So you see this 116, 9/11, 6/11. It all comes together way too well. Vince Lombardi died 2,061 weeks after the national anthem was adopted. United States of America is 261. Trust me, this riddle gets better as we go. Regarding the number 9/11 in all of this. So this year's NFL season has a massive 9/11 riddle for Wisconsin. The Packers' first game this season was against the Minnesota Vikings, and it took place on 9/11. When the Packers played the Bills a few weeks later, the state of Wisconsin was 9,101 weeks old exactly, 911. Then, when the Packers played the Vikings on New Year's the other day, Wisconsin was 9,110 weeks old exactly. The Super Bowl takes place when Wisconsin turns 9,116 weeks old. And the Super Bowl falls 116 days after the Queen died. I'm sorry, that was New Year's Day, the Packers-Vikings game. And this was the big, massive Jesus riddle that we'll talk about a little bit forward. I mentioned the movie Dodgeball and how it relates to all of this. And I want to talk about the death of Rip Torn, who played the coach of the dodgeball team in that film. So quickly, let's explain the dodgeball riddle once more. So back in 2004, a film called Dodgeball, A True Underdog Story came out, starring Vince Vaughn, Ben Stiller. One of my favorite movies, actually. I know I have my original movie ticket somewhere. In this movie, the main character is named Peter LaFleur. LaFleur, right? And consider how the current Packers head coach is Matt LaFleur. So where does this name come from, LaFleur? Well, it traces back to the Jesuit order and Peter Faber, who was canonized in 2013, just 12 days before number 12, Aaron Rodgers, came back and beat the Bears to win the NFC North. In fact, in the year 2013, the Packers played dodgeball at practice on June 6th. But look at the name Faber. When you translate it, it translates to Pierre Lefebvre or Favre. Favre. Are you kidding me? Like Brett Favre, the former quarterback? So this film, Dodgeball, is clearly connected to the Packers. And the coach in the film is Rip Torn, and he's connected to Vince Lombardi. Makes sense, right? His name in the film is Patches O'Houlihan. And he's killed by a falling sign in a casino. Notice how Patches O'Houlihan equals 653. Rip Torn died exactly 653 lunar orbits after Vince Lombardi. In fact, the name Vince Lombardi is very similar. 953. A lot like 653. This also brings us to the coach of the Packers, Matt LaFleur, whose name is 563. By the way, this is the 103rd prime number, and we're in the 103rd NFL season. Measuring from the death of Vince Lombardi to the birth of Matt LaFleur is exactly 9 years, 2 months, and 0 days. 920 is the dialing code in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The Green Bay Packers sums to 902. And remember when Brett Favre had his first big game for the Green Bay Packers when they beat the Cincinnati Bengals? This happened in the year 92. And that game where he entered against the Bengals was on September 20th, 920 of 92. All connecting to the Green Bay Packers and the dialing code. If you measure from the death of Rip Torn to the date of the crown eclipse near Green Bay, you find that he died 703 days before that eclipse. In standard English gematria, not only does crown equal 703, but the name Vince Lombardi equals 703. In fact, Matt LaFleur, the coach of the Packers, was born during Brown Lunation 703. 73, like the gematria of Packers. 73 ordinal. This upcoming Super Bowl, Super Bowl 57, is 73 ordinal. So is the word crown. 73 is the 21st prime number. Notice how Rip Torn died exactly 21 months before Prince Philip, who died 2 months and 1 day before that crown eclipse on his birthday. Measuring from the release of Dodgeball to the crown eclipse over Green Bay is exactly 210 lunar phases. Moon equals 210, so does the Packers, with capital letters. If we take the name Patches O'Houlihan in ordinal, we get 175. Now, Freemasonry was founded on the 175th day of the year. Rip Torn died on the date leaving 175 days in the year. Consider how Aaron Rodgers was born 175 days after the anniversary of the Gateway Arch and Prince Philip's birthday. Bart Starr died 175 days after Aaron Rodgers' birthday. And if you measure from Bart Starr's death to the annular solar eclipse over Green Bay, you get 2 years and 15 days. Annular solar eclipse equals 215. A quick note about how this year's Super Bowl connects to the crown eclipse. Measuring from June 10th of 2021 to the Super Bowl, you get 1 year, 8 months, and 2 days, which is Charles III and crown eclipse, or 1 year, 8 months, 3 days, which is the Green Bay Packers, Super Bowl 57, and Super Bowl, all 183. Rip Torn's death seems to be connected to Prince as well. He died 43 lunar phases after Prince, or lunar orbits, and Rip Torn equals 43, also 79. He died on 79, like eclipse, sacrifice, and murder. Also, for this year's Super Bowl, Rip Torn would have been exactly 4,800 weeks old. And consider how the 48th prime number is 2023. a number of this year, essentially. So that's clearly connected. And man, while this loads, I just want to go on the screen here and say, you know, it's been almost 2 weeks since I did my last live stream, and I try to usually not let that happen. I try to give you guys some content at least every week, an hour plus or so. Now, the reason I didn't go live last week is because I kind of wanted to watch this Packers riddle play out first. I didn't want to jump on and brag and say I was right when there's still 4 or 5 more games to go before they get to where I said they might. It's a long ways away. Another point I'm trying to make is with all of these blog posts, I got like 15, 20 plus blog posts on the Packers connected to the Super Bowl. Part of this is that I'm trying to make a point is that this is the best riddle there is. Period. At least I believe so. And, a lot of people are hung up on, small little things like date numerologies or, of course, these things are significant, but this is a massive, massive overarching riddle. And when you look at the fact that this is Super Bowl 57 in the year 2023, this has to have been in the cards for decades, what's been going on. So I just kind of want to overwhelm people because if it turns out that I'm wrong, and I very well could be, I mean, this is not, I've never said that you're going to make money from sports by watching this channel. But if it doesn't happen, then what's the point of using numerology if these riddles don't work? Or would it mean that the eclipse code is completely irrelevant, which I think it's painfully obvious it's not by this point. All right, so I was trying to get away from making posts about the Packers because, I can get obsessive with things and dive deeply into them. But every time I checked the news, it seemed like something else was pointing to Green Bay, and this was a perfect example. Modest Mouse drummer Jeremiah Green, allegedly dying of cancer just 3 days after we learned that he had cancer. So he must have been in the very late stages when the news hit. For starters, this guy's name, Jeremiah, sums to 69, and 69 is the astrological symbol for Cancer. 69 is also the reduction value of Green Bay Packers. And this guy has the last name Green. On August 11th last year, we had the death of a rugby coach named Paul Green. And amazingly, Paul Green died on August 11th. Pull up his Wikipedia page for you. And he allegedly committed suicide on August 11th. And August 11th is the founding date of the Green Bay Packers. Green equals 49, so does the quarterback Aaron. Paul Green dead at 49. And remember, then the Green Ranger died? The Green Ranger also allegedly committed suicide at 49. This happened a day before the World Cup began, which is a tournament where the color green shows up on everyone's television. So one thing I glossed over in my post on Vince Lombardi is that he was born during lunation -118. So Vince Lombardi was born before the Brown lunation system was put into place. So his lunation is -118. Notice how the word cancer equals 118, which also killed Vince Lombardi. The words death and homicide, both 118 in Latin. This brings us to the drummer of Modest Mouse, Jeremiah Green, whose name sums to 118. If we instead look at his full name, we get a value of 193. This is the 44th prime number. And in the ordinal cipher, cancer, chemo, and kill all equal 44. Okay, so this is relevant. So this news about Jeremiah Green, we learned about this just one day after J.J. Watt announced his retirement. Now, J.J. Watt went to college at Wisconsin. He was born in Wisconsin, where the Packers play. This man retired the same day that the Wisconsin Badgers played the Oklahoma State Cowboys in a bowl game in Phoenix, which is the same city as the Super Bowl. The last time the Badgers played in this bowl game in Phoenix was December of 1996, which is when the Packers won the Super Bowl the following month. If you measure from the date that the Packers beat the Cowboys to the date that the Badgers beat the Cowboys, it was 44 days. Look at the name Watt equals 44. Wisconsin equals 44. Packers equals 44. And when you write out 44, you get 99, which is the number that J.J. Watt wears. 99, like the moon, 99. If you measure from Jeremiah Green's birthday to Vince Lombardi's birthday, you get 99 days. So I talked about Paul Green, the rugby coach. He died on the Packers' 103rd anniversary. Ritual Human Sacrifice 103. Of course, Vince Lombardi, born in the year 13. Well, the name Jeremiah Martin Green also sums to 103. And measuring from the Packers' 103rd anniversary to his diagnosis was 139 days. 139 like Green Bay 139. The story was also 103 days before the date of the next eclipse, which is from Saros 139. Notice how Green Bay also equals 41, the 13th prime number. He was the drummer for Modest Mouse, which equals 41. Furthermore, in reduction, Jeremiah Green equals 73. That's the value of Packers, 73. Sacrifice, ritual sacrifice, 73. We had a rugby player commit suicide. Rugby equals 73. His diagnosis was 1 month and 16 days before the Super Bowl. Packers 116. This is also 46 days like sacrifice. And the date had 46 numerology. The type of cancer he had, stage 4, syncs up with Super Bowl. It's a super match. And I mentioned this 116 with Vince Lombardi at length. Well, if you measure from the anniversary of Vince Lombardi's death to the date of the diagnosis, it was 116 days. Vince Lombardi would have been a total of 19,110 days old or 19,109 days old. These are numbers connected to the ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry, 1911. And then this 1919 number, that connects to the year that the Packers were founded, 1919. These numbers all connected to the eclipse code. Eclipse equals 192. And this news story fell 109 years and 200 days after Vince was born. Oh, I know what this is. I actually messed this date measurement up because I put the 27th. Check this out. From the birth of Vince Lombardi to the date that this guy was diagnosed with cancer was 109 years and 21 days. And this is the same number that shows up in the measurement with John Lennon, you'll see in a minute. The Packers' first season in the NFL was 1921. So when Vince Lombardi died, the United States of America was exactly 2,330 months old. 233. This is, of course, the value of 1331, the ultimate eclipse number, 233. But check out Messiah equals 233. This has been a big theme in sports lately ever since Messi won the World Cup. Notice how Jesus the Messiah equals 233 and 1331. I bring this all up because the name Jeremiah Green, this Modest Mouse drummer, his name also equals 233. The Packers play their home games at Lambeau Field, which equals 233. The 13th Fibonacci. Vince Lombardi, born in the year 13. Lombardi's death was connected to solar Saros 119. This diagnosis fell 1,970 days after the last eclipse from Saros 119, and 1970 is the year that Vince Lombardi died. In fact, 197 is also the 45th prime number, and Jeremiah Green, now dead at the age of 45. This was all in connection to Paul Green, the rugby coach. Paul Green equals 45 and 45. The last Packers Super Bowl was Super Bowl 45, and that Super Bowl gave them 13 championships. 13 equals 45 and 45. So this dude's death, Jeremiah Green, completely up and down coded with the numbers of Vince Lombardi and the Packers. We talked a little bit about J.J. Watt and how this all happened the same day that the Packers played the Badgers played the Cowboys in a bowl game. So let's talk about J.J. Watt, because I've mentioned before how he is already synced up with this year's Super Bowl, and it appears as if his retirement is part of this riddle as well. Come on, blog. Let's go. All right. So once again, he retires the same date that his alma mater was playing in a bowl game in Phoenix, which is where the Super Bowl is hosted and where J.J. Watt currently plays. He's a Phoenix Cardinal, Arizona Cardinal, playing in Phoenix. Now, he and his brother, T.J. Watt, are two of the most highly esteemed defenders in the league. And it's interesting that they both wear 99 and 90. And the moon equals 99 and 90. And this year's Super Bowl completely coded with the moon. J.J. Watt was shown in this article with his son. Apparently, this was his son's first NFL game when he announced his retirement. And this all connects to Christian Watson of the Packers. We'll get into that in a little bit. When J.J. Watt announced his retirement, he was 33 years and 280 days old. These are the similar digits as his age for the Super Bowl, 12,380 days old. And what makes this so significant is that the Super Bowl is being played during Brown Lunation 1238, syncing up perfectly with this guy's age. 1238. 1238 in the age, 1238 in the lunation number. Also, J.J. Watt was born on 3/22, and this Super Bowl is in 2023. But this 238 number, significant for another reason. The moon is an average of 238,000 miles from Earth. This is a number connected to 666. Notice how Justin James Watt has matching gematria with 666 and the moon, 283. Three of the same digits that we're talking about. And we know this year's game is a big moon ritual already, but check this out. When you write out moon, it sums to 57 for Super Bowl 57. But remember Super Bowl 51? Moon equals 51. If you measure between these two Super Bowls, you get exactly 314 weeks. And the 314th prime number is 2083, which is the value of 666. This is kind of a complex weaving of the English language here, but it's important to understand because it'll clue you into future riddles. Mathematics of the circle sums to 666. Watt retired 66 weeks, 6 days before the next Great American Total Eclipse. Remember, that eclipse in 2024 belongs to Saros 139, which is the value of Freemasonry and Green Bay. Remember in Super Bowl 51, we had this amazing play where Julian Edelman caught a football like just barely off the tip of the grass. And I made a big post on that because when it happened, it was 2:23 on the clock. 2:23 on the clock. And the only two numbers you could see were 223 on the field. 223 there. And Tom Brady was, his full name equals 2023, like Super Bowl 51, 2023. Julian Edelman was born on the date, leaving 223 days in the year. And now here we are with the Super Bowl in 2023. So this is all connected somehow. Watt retired 48 days before the Super Bowl. 223, the 48th prime number. So J.J. Watt went to Wisconsin. Wisconsin was his alma mater. And I want to talk more about this concept of mater and motherhood. This year's Super Bowl is sizing up to be a massive riddle connected to the Immaculate Conception. This was essentially solidified by the death of Franco Harris just before his number was retired on Christmas Eve. Franco Harris, the athlete who made the Immaculate Reception back in 1972, which was also the last year that a team went perfect in the NFL. So let's dive a little bit more into this. The number 57, setting up to be a huge ritual for the Super Bowl. The number 57 has the same gematria as Super Bowl. The Green Bay Packers play at Lambeau Field. And when Lambeau Field opened, it was called City Stadium. City Stadium. And look what year it opened in. It opened in the year 57. And the word city equals 57 in ordinal. Recall Vince Lombardi died at the age of 57. And the name Vince equals 757. Meanwhile, the Green Bay Packers were founded on a date with primary numerology of 57. And when you write out Green Bay Packers with capital letters, reverse, you get 507. Remember, last year and earlier this year, Aaron Rodgers took a stance against the vaccine. And there's actually a strong numeric tie here because Aaron Rodgers equals 135 ordinal. And the 135th prime number is 761. Well, notice how the word vaccine equals 761. In the alphabetic order, vaccine equals 57. Earlier this year, Aaron Rodgers played the Packers' first ever game in England on the birthday of John Lennon. England equals 57. And it was a month after England crowned a new king, Charles III, which equals 57. Now, in America, we call this sport football, but the sport that most of the world calls football, we call it soccer here in the United States. And think about who just hosted the World Cup this year, Qatar. Qatar equals 57. And the World Cup final was 57 days before Super Bowl 57. To get there, the Packers will have to maintain perfection, which equals 57. Remember the running back who died just before Christmas Eve. His name was Franco, the Immaculate Reception. Franco equals 57. Now, naturally, the Immaculate Conception is a celebration of the Virgin Mary, free from original sin. And notice how the name Mary equals 57. This has to do with the birth of Christ. Birth is 57. The Latin word for mother, mater, again, alma mater. Mater sums to 57. And if it's true that Jesus was born on September 11th, that would make him a Gemini, which equals 57. In fact, mother of Jesus is 57. So is birth ritual. Human equals 57. The human race referred to as the Homo sapien race, Homo 57. In a little bit, we'll talk about this Watson riddle with Aaron Rodgers. IBM equals 57. We'll also talk about Rome being connected, Rome 57. But this is the big moon and eclipse number. Moon 57 with its 57-degree range of declination. And in Hebrew, the word eclipse equals 57. Also, the moon is connected to the Earth through the golden ratio. And moon has matching gematria with golden and golden ratio, all 57. Consider how the Packers logo is surrounded by a thin golden line, very similar to an annular eclipse. And Green Bay Packers has matching gematria with annular eclipse, 150. If the Packers make it to the Super Bowl, think about this being Aaron Rodgers' 15th season as a starter. The Super Bowl would be his 15th playoff victory. It's possible they play the Bills in the 15th matchup all time, exactly 15 weeks after they played the Bills during the regular season. Masonry equals 105. The Packers logo, similar to masonry. Masonry also equals 84, which is the reduction value of both the Green Bay Packers and Green Bay Packers. Now, speaking of sun and eclipses and the number 15, remember the Packers quarterback who won the first 2 Super Bowls, Bart Starr, wore number 15. If the Packers win the Super Bowl, it'll be their 831st victory in franchise history. And notice how Mary, if I can get this cipher to show, Mary equals 831. Notice how Green Bay, Wisconsin is a super match with Blessed Virgin Mary and total solar eclipse. From the Super Bowl to the next eclipse from Saros 139 is 1 year and 56 days or 13 months and 4 weeks. Both of these are major eclipse numbers. 156 eclipse Hebrew, solar eclipse 134 ordinal. But I want to point something out because in my last video, I talked about this huge trend I was noticing with the numbers 334 and 433. The Packers' last loss was to the Eagles by a score of 33-40. And this number keeps showing up in all of these measurements. Lambeau Field 433 like solar eclipse. Not going to go into all of these now, but there's a very strong trend, right? Well, when you write out the number 334 and 433, you get Latin gematria of 1572. Blessed Virgin Mary sums to 1572. And another reason we know this number is significant, think about the new World Trade Center. One World Trade Center sums to 1572. And even though the building only has 94 floors, the top floor is the 104th story. Blessed Virgin Mary and total solar eclipse, both 104. And of course, the original World Trade Center brought down on 9/11. 9/11, the date that many people believe to be the real Jesus Christ birthday. September 11th. Notice how Green Bay, Wisconsin, Blessed Virgin Mary, and total solar eclipse all also share gematria of 797 in Satanic. And this is an important number to Green Bay. Remember the executive Ted Thompson, who died in 2021. His name equals 797. Now, Christine Perfect, the Fleetwood Mac singer, who died on the ultimate eclipse date, November 30th, she would be 79 years and 7 months old for the Super Bowl. Exactly. Which is wild because if you multiply 7 times 97, you get 679, which is the number of days between their deaths. In fact, Vince Lombardi had reverse gematria of 679. But one more note regarding the Immaculate Conception. I occasionally mention how 1331 equals 1139. Here we have a guy named Thompson, right? Thompson, a lot like Thomas. Vince Lombardi, his middle name was Thomas. Thomas means twin. Notice how twins equals 1139. So does the word crucifixion, 1139. Immaculate Conception also shares this 1139 Gematria. And think about Jesus' parents, Mary and Joseph, 1139 in the same cipher. Packers have still not lost since Christine Perfect died on the ultimate eclipse date, November 30th. On New Year's Eve, the date written 1231, we lost a former pope, Benedict XVI. Now, his death on December 31st ties into this whole Blessed Virgin Mary riddle with the Packers. Notice how Wisconsin comes to 1231 in Latin Gematria, the date of the Pope's death. Now, 1231 is a prime number, the 202nd prime number. And Blessed Virgin Mary, 202. Just like Green Bay, Wisconsin. And total solar eclipse, all 202. Pope Benedict's middle name was Aloysius. This reminds us of Aloysius Gonzaga, who was a Jesuit and beatified by the Catholic Church and canonized. So these two deaths are very connected. First of all, Gonzaga was a Jesuit, and notice how the name Joseph Ratzinger matches Society of Jesus. Remember, this guy retired. He was the first pope to retire in like 600 years. And then he gave way to the first ever Jesuit pope, Pope Francis. So he dies on 1231. Well, Aloysius Gonzaga was canonized on 1231. If you measure from the date he was canonized to the date that Benedict died, it was exactly 296 years. And the name Joseph Aloysius Ratzinger equals 296 in the alphabetic order. This also a number connected to the Star-Spangled Banner, 296. Both of these also summing to 1776. And of course, that's the year that the United States was founded, 1776. Measuring from the birth of America in 1776 to the death of this pope, notice how you get 90,029 days. In Latin, United States of America equals 929. This is the 158th prime number, like Freemasonry, 158. Remember, the next day, the Packers played the Vikings in this massive Jesus game. Talk about that. So Aloysius Gonzaga is the namesake of Gonzaga University, which is a powerhouse in college basketball. And notice how Gonzaga is currently 12-3 for the death of the Pope. 12-3. Saint Aloysius de Gonzaga equals 123. So does Vincent Thomas Lombardi, 123. The new King Charles has this 123. Saint Aloysius de Gonzaga also has numbers syncing up with the king, Charles III and King Charles III, 264. So I mentioned how Green Bay, Wisconsin has this 202 like Blessed Virgin Mary, right? Well, notice how this also sums to 85. Blessed Virgin Mary, also 85. Total solar eclipse, 85 single reduction. The date that the Pope died had primary numerology of 85. This was the first 85 date in almost 30 years. His last name, Ratzinger, also syncs up with Wisconsin. Wow, there's so much here, guys. I'm going to run out of breath before I'm done with posts this video. So NFL equals 32. There's 32 teams in the league. And Minnesota, who played in the big Packers game the next day, was the 32nd state added to the Union. They celebrated this by returning the opening kickoff to the 32-yard line. Christ equals 32. The Pope that Benedict replaced was born during lunation -32, and his birth seems to be connected to the NFL, which was established 122 days later. National Football League, 122. I mentioned this 334 number just a little bit ago, and who would think that this game would end up with a score of 3-34 at one point? And this was 30,034 days after the death of John Lennon. Try to get there in a little bit here. This kind of deserves its own video, so I might do that yet. What I need to do here is talk about this riddle with John Lennon and Vince Lombardi. All right, guys, tell you what, we're about an hour and 20 minutes in. What I'm going to do is take a quick break. I'll run a quick little intermission here. And got to get a graphic up. All right, sit tight, everybody. Give me about 60 seconds, 90 seconds. I will return in a second. Okay. All right. So I put John Lennon on the thumbnail for this video, so we better get to it, because this, to me, is one of the wildest things. And first, we need to point out how Lombardi and Lennon both sum to 74. And this is the big number that has everything to do with the killing of Jesus. Jesus, the King, Messiah, cross, etc. All 74. Lennon equals 74, so does Lombardi. Now, earlier this year, the Packers played their first ever game in London. Notice how London equals 74. This is like our Independence Day here in the United States, which is July 4th, written 7/4, and Independence Day equals 74. This is our national holiday, which equals 74. John Lennon was killed in New York, which sits on the 74th meridian, and in the prime number cipher, New York sums to the 74th prime number. Measuring from the birth of the United States to the death of John Lennon is 74,666 days. This is also 10,666 weeks. In fact, when he was born, the United States was 59,996 days old. That's a pretty strong alignment, isn't it? Well, check out how Star-Spangled Banner comes to 666 in Latin Gematria. The Star-Spangled Banner was written by Francis Scott Key. And if you measure from the death of Francis Scott Key to the death of Vince Lombardi, you get 6,660 weeks. Now, 666 is connected to Jesus, as Jesus is the Son of God. The magic square of the sun yields a sum of 666 with its 36 squares. Notice how both Vince Lombardi and John Winston Lennon both summed to 224 in the reverse alphabetic order. London is 224, so is Lennon 224. But this connects to Jesus the Messiah. Jesus the Messiah summing to 224. Of course, the big 1331, that eclipse number. Also, the Society of Jesus, which allegedly venerates Jesus, equals 224 as well. So earlier this year, Aaron Rodgers plays his first ever game in London, and the Packers became the 32nd and final team to play in London. Rodgers was born in the year 83, whereas John Lennon was born on the date leaving 83 days in the year. This is a big football number. Football, 83 ordinal. Both American and English football have 22 men on the field at all times. And think about how this connects to the football organization around the globe. FIFA equals 22. And this year, the 22 World Cup was the 22nd World Cup of all time. And they even had Lionel Messi kick the penalty kick at 22:22 on the clock. And then it ended 2-2 in regulation. Notice how Stars and Stripes equals 202, which is a nickname for the flag. Again, Green Bay, Wisconsin, 202, this big football number. National Football League equals 220. Just like London, England, 220 reverse. And check out the lunation for John Lennon's birthday. John Lennon, born during lunation 220, signifying that his death probably connected to the sport of football. Notice how he died 2,200 weeks before this year's Super Bowl, which ends the 22 season. On October 9th this year, which was John Lennon's 82nd birthday, the Packers played their first ever game in London. And recall how John Winston Lennon equals 82 in reduction. Lennon died 82 days after the anniversary of the NFL, September 17th. Measuring from the death of John Lennon to the birth of Aaron Rodgers. Wait, what was it? Yeah. No, the death of John Lennon. Right. It's 1,089 days. Here we go. Lennon to Rodgers, 1,089 days. Well, Aaron Rodgers equals 189. And when Rodgers entered the game and left the game, he had 142 career victories. Remember, Lombardi equals 142. But what's really interesting is that this game in London took place exactly 127 days before the Super Bowl, and Vince Lombardi equals 127. Vince Lombardi dead 127 years after Francis Scott Key, who wrote the words to the national anthem. So the Packers played their first ever season in 1921. And when Vince Lombardi died, John Lennon was 10,921 days old. He was also 330 days after his 29th birthday. Now, the 330 is important because Vincent Thomas Lombardi equals 330. But how about this 29? John Lennon, 29 years old when Vince died. His birthday is October 9th, or like 109, which is the 29th prime number. And Vince Lombardi died on a date with 29 numerology. John Lennon died on a date with 29 numerology. Aaron Rodgers was born on the date leaving 29 days in the year. And look at how this syncs up with Lennon, London, football, Jesus, all 29. We talked about how Lombardi's death was connected to Solar Saros 116. Well, check this out. This Solar Saros is linked to Lunar Saros 109. So these are the eclipses that happened at the exact midway point. 109, like Lennon's birthday, the 29th prime number. Well, if you measure from the end of Lunar Saros 109, look at this. Lunar Saros 109, these cycles last 1,300 plus years sometimes. August 18th of 2016, the absolute final eclipse from Saros 109 to the Super Bowl is 2,370 days, 237. Vincent Thomas Lombardi equals 237. Lombardi died in 1970, exactly 10 years and 97 days before John Lennon. Remember, Packers equals 1097 and 1907. The Beatles equals 97. Lennon's birthday was 97 days after Independence Day. Lombardi died on the date leaving 119 days in the year. Lennon died on a date with 119 numerology, like Star-Spangled Banner equals 119. Or the Star-Spangled Banner. Now notice how the number 119 is 7 times 17. And when John Lennon died, it was during lunation 717. This year's Super Bowl is Aaron Rodgers' 2046th week since he was born. 246. Lennon was born a span of 246 days before Lombardi's birthday. Lombardi died on the 246th day of the year. This year's Super Bowl not only falls 246 days after Lombardi's birthday, but it's also been 246 days since the United States was established. The Super Bowl falls 223 days after Independence Day and 22 weeks, 3 days after the NFL season. Think about how Beatles equals 223 for the year 2023. The Star-Spangled Banner equals 223 in ordinal. Lombardi died 2 months, 23 days after his birthday. The Packers-Vikings game on New Year's was 2 months and 23 days after Lennon's birthday. Packers executive Ted Thompson died 2 years, 23 days before the Super Bowl. And the Green Bay Packers were founded on the 223rd day of the year. Maybe we're just getting teased with this Packers run, hey? It's like, even if they're not going to the Super Bowl, these alignments are so strong that they had to give them a run. But I mean, I still think they have a good chance. I don't know. So let's talk about this huge Jesus riddle that played out in front of us on January 1st. So we talked about how the former Pope died when the United States was 90,029 days old, and United States of America 929. Well, the following day, from Independence Day to the Packers-Vikings game, was 90,030 days. This was the age of the United States for New Year's Day. 93 is a heavily significant number to Vincent Thomas Lombardi, whose name sums to 93. Lombardi died on September 3rd, or 9-3. And when he died, he was 20,903 days old. The Green Bay Packers equals 93. So does Minnesota Vikings, 93. Charles III, the new king, 93. The Vikings, who lost this game, play on the 93rd meridian there in Minnesota. recall how Christ was said to have been crucified on the 93rd day of the year, April 3rd, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. God's Son, crucifix, Nazareth, and Christianity all summing to 93. And if you watched this game, Jim Nantz, the commentator, said, "Oh, it looks like Aaron Rodgers has 93 yards passing on the day." And then his very next pass, that next play, was Christian Watson's first reception. Christianity, 93. So when Vince Lombardi died, we had this number in his age, 293. Well, the number 293 is the 62nd prime number. Vince Lombardi died 62 days after America's anniversary, and his death was connected to Francis Scott Key, whose name sums to 62. So, how was this game a Jesus riddle? Well, this is too good. Aaron Rodgers entered the game with a record of 146 and 74. That's the reverse value of Jesus Christ. Meanwhile, the Minnesota Vikings entered the game with 515 wins all time. And not only does Minnesota equal 515, but so does Jesus, 515. When Vince Lombardi was born, the United States was 50,015 days old. A big Jesus number. Jesus said to have been born on 9/11. Well, Wisconsin was 9,110 weeks old for this game. Aaron Rodgers picked up his 147th career victory during the regular season. Notice how Lombardi, Jesus, Messiah, also Lennon, all 147 with capital letters. And what do you know? Aaron Rodgers threw for 159 yards in this game. 159? That's weird because that's the Gematria of Packer. 159. And if you measure from the death of Vince Lombardi to the birth of Aaron Rodgers, you get exactly a span of 159 months. So let's talk about the numerology that was practiced in this game. Well, on the Packers' first drive, they had a punt blocked by Josh Metellus. And right off the bat, I noticed his number, 44. Packers 44. Vikings 44. But check out how old this guy was. 9,111 days old. Are you kidding me? 9111. On top of that, the name Josh Metellus sums to an 888, which is the Greek value of Jesus. The Packers would then score a touchdown after a field goal, and it was returned by Keyshawn Nixon, who of course wore this cross eye black. A lot of players do this now. The Packers' second touchdown came from another return. And notice how Darnell Savage, the return man, 156 days after his birthday. And of course, 9/11 is the 156th prime number. We also had a strip sack on Kirk Cousins by Kenny Clark. Kenny Clark's name sums to 156. A lot of 93 as well with all of this. Darnell Savage's full name, 93. Rodgers then threw a touchdown to Robert Tonyan, whose name sums to 93. But this was a big riddle connected to the national anthem. In trigonal gematria, national anthem sums to 1123, which is the 188th prime number. Think about the date of the game, 1/1/23. And the man who wrote the national anthem, Francis Scott Key, his name equals 188. I talked a lot about these numbers earlier, but what I want to point out is this Colin Kaepernick riddle. So we all remember, a lot of people kneel for the national anthem now. I don't know if this is really still going on, but at the World Cup, for instance, people still kneel before the opening whistle. And the reason Colin Kaepernick was chosen is because he is completely coated with numbers of Vince Lombardi, the original national anthem riddle. Remember, Lombardi died 2 months, 23 days after his birthday. And this brings us to Colin Kaepernick, who, by the way, I'm not mistaken, wasn't he born in Wisconsin? Yeah, look at this. Colin Kaepernick, born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. How appropriate. The name Kaepernick equals 223 and 48. And 223 is the 48th prime number. Remember, the Packers fell to 4-8 before they began their hot streak? The Star-Spangled Banner 223. The name Kaepernick equals 93. His full name equals 93 and 330. These are the same numbers found in Vincent Thomas Lombardi, 93 and 330. Colin Kaepernick was born a span of 146 days after Lombardi's birthday. Colin Kaepernick equals 146. In prime numbers, Kaepernick equals a prime number, 271. Lombardi was born a span of 271 days after the anniversary of the poem Defense of Fort McHenry, whose lyrics would go on to be used as the Star-Spangled Banners. 271 is the 58th prime number, and this game in Green Bay ended with 58 points. This was a ritual for Stars and Stripes. 58. Colin Kaepernick, even born on the date leaving 58 days in the year. Colin Kaepernick's full name equals 570. National anthem has the same digits, 705. Also 57 reduction. If you measure from the crown eclipse over Green Bay and Minnesota to this game between Green Bay and Minnesota, you get exactly 570 days, syncing up perfectly with Colin Kaepernick, 570. In fact, Rodgers scored a touchdown in this game. It was his first rushing touchdown in 57 weeks. And look at the time on the clock when he stepped into the end zone. 9:25. He and his teammates kind of sheepishly put their arms out to the side like a cross when this happened. 9:25. Well, that's because Jesus Christ equals 9:25. If you measure from Vince Lombardi's birthday to the date that the Star-Spangled Banner became our national anthem, it was exactly 925 weeks. Again, the Star-Spangled Banner became the national anthem on March 3rd, a 33 date. The words were from a poem called Defense of Fort McHenry, written by Francis Scott Key. So 925, I actually talked about this when I kicked the video off. You may recall last night, this collapse on the field, Damar Hamlin. They told us that it was 9:25 when he was taken off the field. And I just thought that was interesting in light of what happened the day before with Aaron Rodgers scoring that rushing touchdown with 9:25, a number that connects Vince to the Star-Spangled Banner. So this Packers-Vikings game also had a sacrifice in it. And the sacrifice was Justin Jefferson, who destroys the Packers in every other game. But I knew something was up because they started talking about Jair Alexander, the cornerback for the Packers, before the game. And they were like, he's talking a lot of smack. He thinks he's going to step up. And sure enough, he did. He almost shut this guy out of catches altogether. So why was Justin Jefferson the Jesus sacrifice for this game? Well, check out his full name, Justin Jamal Jefferson, 93. Again, the United States with the 93 in its age for this game. So Jair Alexander was the quarterback who shut him down. Notice how Jair Alexander sums to 127 like Vince Lombardi. Justin Jefferson was born 127 days after Jair Alexander's birthday. The number 86 was prevalent here as well. Human sacrifice and blood sacrifice both equal 86. And to 86 someone is to off or get rid of them. Well, Justin Jefferson was exactly 8,600 days old for this game, or 6 months, 16 days after his birthday. Ritual sacrifice equals 616, and his birthday is 616, June 16th. Born in 1999, which has the upside down 666. Remember Star-Spangled Banner 666. His full name also equals 123, and Crucifixion of Jesus Christ is 123, so is Vincent Thomas Lombardi. Jefferson had just 15 yards on one reception from 5 targets. So the number 15 coded in here, like Green Bay Packers and Crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And of course, Jefferson wears number 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. Born in 1999. He had all the numbers to fail on this date. Seeing as we're talking about wide receivers, let's talk about Aaron Rodgers' wide receiver, Christian Watson, because this is part of a riddle that's been going on for well over a decade now. So back in 2011, Aaron Rodgers won the Super Bowl on February 6th. The very next week on Jeopardy, Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter came back, 2 of the best Jeopardy players of all time, and they faced against a computer named Watson. And this is interesting, right? Because Rodgers would go on to be a Jeopardy champion for Celebrity Jeopardy. Not only that, but he actually hosted episodes of Jeopardy following the death of Alex Trebek. Now, in 2022, the Packers drafted a receiver named Christian Watson. And this is especially strange because Christian Watson's dad, Tim Watson, had already been drafted by the Packers. Tim Watson drafted the 156th pick in the year 93. How interesting. And now his new Islamic name sums to 93. So IBM Watson, Christian Watson, Rodgers on Jeopardy. Huge riddle here. Notice how Watson sums to 92 and 902. This is similar to the Green Bay Packers, who play in the 920 dialing code. So Rodgers wears number 12. In Gematria, Jeopardy equals 1200. The name Alex Trebek, with 12 Gematria with the zeros dropped. Christian Watson went to North Dakota. And notice how North Dakota sums to 1020. This is all in the lead up to Super Bowl 57, and 57 equals 1200. 1200 is also the standard sum of North Dakota State, which is the full sum of the college that Christian Watson attended. But notice how North Dakota State also equals 192. Well, when Aaron Rodgers won Jeopardy, Christian Watson was exactly 192 months old. That's right, Aaron Rodgers' Jeopardy victory was on May 12th, which is the birthday of Christian Watson. How is this a coincidence? Obviously, it's not. But think of this date, May 12th. It can also be written as 12/5 on the calendar. Well, Christian Watson was born 125 years after Thomas Watson, who was the namesake of the IBM Watson computer. This is also 1,502 months. Thomas Watson was the founder of IBM, which stands for International Business Machines, which sums to 125. Think about Wisconsin summing to 125 as well. So if you measure from Aaron Rodgers' victory on Celebrity Jeopardy, where he beat an astronaut and this Shark Tank mogul, isn't it kind of scary that our athletes are way smarter than those people? Well, Aaron Rodgers is a sharp cookie, we know that. But that Celebrity Jeopardy game was exactly 93 months before Super Bowl 57. Aaron Charles Rodgers, 93. The Green Bay Packers, 93. Remember Vince Lombardi's full name, 93. Dead on 9-3. And here we are in the year of Super Bowl 57. Well, IBM equals 57. Christian Watson went to North Dakota State, which equals 57. Think about how May 7th, 5-7, is the 127th day of the year. In Gematria, IBM Watson sums to 127. International Business Machines also sums to 1207. Measuring from the death of Thomas Watson to the birth of Aaron Rodgers is 10,027 days. Christian Watson went to North Dakota, which equals 127. Like Vince Lombardi, 127. So the IBM Corporation was founded in the year 1911. And this stands out because look at the computer, Watson. Watson equals 911. Now this is an upside down 116. IBM Watson equals 116. So does Packers. Aaron Rodgers, born on a date with 116 numerology. Christian Watson, born on a date with 116 numerology. Christian Watson also has primary birth numerology of 135, which connects to Aaron Rodgers, 135. IBM Computer, 135. In fact, IBM with capitals, 135. Notice how Thomas Watson's full name sums to 215. Thomas John Watson, 215 and 217. Well, IBM Watson's first appearance on Jeopardy was on 215. And then it went to the date 217. So this means that Watson's final appearance on Jeopardy was 137 years after Thomas Watson was born, exactly. That's the 33rd prime number. And Christian Justice Watson, 303. Jesus crucified at the age of 33, etc. So in order to complete their quest for perfection, remember, it was the first 12 weeks when the Packers fell to 4-8. And now they're trying to win their first Super Bowl in 12 years. So as part of this giant perfection riddle, the Packers had to play against the Dolphins, who are the only team in NFL history to complete a perfect season. And this game was held on Christmas Day. This is where Aaron Rodgers became 146 and 74. Now I want you to notice the score of this game, 26-20. This points to the number 262. Area code 262 covers much of southeastern Wisconsin, but mainly Waukesha County. And back in 2021, Waukesha was the site of a terror attack at the Christmas parade when Darrell Brooks drove through the crowd, killing 5 or 6 people. So this game, unfortunately, is a riddle connected to that disaster. First off, notice how that Christmas parade was on the eve of the JFK assassination date. And the perpetrator is a supermatch with John Fitzgerald Kennedy. In fact, if you measure from this guy's birthday, Darrell Brooks, to the JFK assassination, you get 6,666 days. So this game could also be read 20-26 for the final score. And the number 226 is the value of sacrifice in English, 226. Notice how sacrifice equals 73 like Packers. And this win on Christmas was Matt LaFleur's 46th win, which is the reduction value of sacrifice. Right after the Packers played on Christmas, the other Wisconsin sports team, the Milwaukee Bucks, played. And notice how they finished with 118 points. Milwaukee, 1180. Wisconsin, 118. Death, homicide, 118. So this Packers-Dolphins game was 57 weeks exactly after the Waukesha Christmas Parade attack. And here we are on the lead up to Super Bowl 57. Now, this is also 399 days. Notice how Aaron Rodgers' full name equals 399. But the word murder also equals 399. And on the date of the murder at the Waukesha Christmas Parade, Darrell Brooks was exactly 39 years and 9 months old. Look at how his common name, Darrell Brooks, equals 150 and 201. Green Bay Packers 150, Aaron Charles Rodgers 201. 201 also the value of Minnesota Vikings, which is the next Packers opponent after that Dolphins game. The win on Christmas, by the way, gave the Green Bay Packers 789 wins in franchise history. And in Latin Gematria, Green Bay Packers equals 789. While we're on this topic here, Freemasonry, look at these values, right? Green Bay Packers, 789, 1149. Freemasonry is 787, 1147. I bring this up because, once again, there's something called the Rule of Kallel in Freemasonry. And this rule, I don't use it very often because it allows you to play with numbers, and we don't need to play with numbers to show the relevance of Gematria. However, I know it's relevant because this is a perfect example. Consider how the Freemasonic emblem has the G in it. Just like the Packers logo, right? The Green Bay Packers. Well, if you add 1 to the value of Freemasonry, you get 788 and then 1148, right? And if you subtract 1 from Green Bay Packers, you get 788 and 1148. So to me, this is the best evidence of the Rule of Kallel right in plain view. Like, yeah, these are 2 numbers off, but if you add 1 and subtract 1, you can actually get a match. And I would never do this with reduction or ordinal because, it's too easy to play with numbers then, but when you're looking at numbers this big and symbolism that ties up, I think it is relevant. Also, just think of the word Freemasonry, right? Like, look at the first 6 letters. Freema. Well, if you add 1 to F, you get G. You take 1 away from M, you get N. Add 1 to A, you get B. Suddenly, you have the first few letters of Green Bay. And Freemasonry ends with Y. So, that is a very, very powerful connection. And remember, the Packers' first win to start this streak was their 787th win of all time. And that win just happened to overtake the Chicago Bears for most wins in NFL history. Speaking of Freemasonry, the parade attack occurred 448 weeks after the Boston Marathon bombing. And this was just days after the death of Franco Harris, 448. Ancient accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry is 448, like Eclipse Sacrifice, 448, Immaculate, 448. The Waukesha Christmas Parade was 448 days before the Super Bowl. That's also 1 year and 12 weeks exactly, and Super Bowl equals 112. This year's Super Bowl on the 112th meridian. Okay, we're almost 2 hours into this live stream. Might be the longest super stream of all time. I got one more thing I want to look at before we wrap this bad boy up. Thanks to everybody who, you guys are true warriors. Listening to me talk about numbers for 2 hours. You guys are almost as crazy as I am. But I love it. It's good to get the love. And, I don't set out to make sports picks. But when I do, there's a good reason why. And I'd like to think that, when I called the Braves before the MLB playoffs a couple years ago to win the World Series, I thought that would turn more heads because they were the least likely team to win the World Series going into the playoffs. But all of the numbers lined up for Atlanta. And of course, Atlanta is in Georgia, which is the only state that has matching 44 gematria with Wisconsin. And I feel as if, that season had everything to do with the death of Hank Aaron. Of course, Hank Aaron started with the Milwaukee Braves, then came back to the Milwaukee Brewers. And now we have Aaron Rodgers, right? One more thing I wanted to mention. I've been talking about this riddle with the Star-Spangled Banner and the national anthem for the Super Bowl this year. It's very strong. Well, the guy who wrote the words to that national anthem, notice how he was Key was a lawyer in the Burr conspiracy trial. And the Burr conspiracy trial was planned by Aaron Burr. And check out the name Aaron Burr. 135 and 63, just like Aaron Rodgers. This kind of stuff blows my mind, right? I'm sure you've all heard of Aaron Burr, the famous duel, and it seems to be connected to Aaron Rodgers. All right, so the last thing I want to touch on is this year's NFL cartoon, their Christmas cartoon. They do this every year. They have for a while. And after the Super Bowl, it's been very easy to look back and find hints or clues that kind of pointed at the two teams in the Super Bowl. And I very much believe that the Packers seem to be coded into this, or have a good riddle at least. The man who's representing the Packers here is A.J. Dillon. I talked about A.J. Dillon a lot in recent videos. He's one of the few Jewish players in the league. So they have him here spinning a dreidel, a couple dreidels there, celebrating Hanukkah while everyone else is celebrating Christmas. Notice how A.J. Dillon is sitting right next to another man wearing number 28. Now, the number 28 is the second perfect number, and there are no other perfect numbers in this shot here that we're looking at. And the reason that is especially relevant is because right over here, a player for the Panthers is holding up a sign that says, "To me, you are perfect." I was like, wow, what are the odds that, I've been talking about perfection this whole time. The Packer they chose has the perfect number. It says perfect over here. Huh. Well, first of all, the word dreidel equals 57, like this year's Super Bowl. And I want to talk about this Panthers player, number 53, Brian Burns, and how he connects to all of this. First of all, remember earlier how I mentioned that the last two teams to take a perfect record to the end of the season were the Green Bay Packers and Carolina Panthers. And it's interesting that a Panther has the sign for perfect there. All of this summing to 73. Well, Brian Burns was drafted in the first round with the 16th pick, 116. Perfect and Packers both summed to 116. Aaron Rodgers with 116 birth numerology. The name Brian Burns matches Wisconsin in Gematria, 118, 55. But also notice how Wisconsin equals 125, and Burns' birth numerology is 125. Furthermore, his initials are 22. Green Bay, Wisconsin, 202. The 202nd prime, 1231, like Wisconsin. Former Pope dying on that date. And this image here just exhibits how strongly the Packers are coded with eclipses. It's actually pretty wild. So, this is a great thing to end this video on. You guys are going to like this eclipse riddle that Aaron Rodgers is part of. So, Brian Burns was born on April 23rd, or 423. Now, the number 423 is significant for the moon. The moon equals 423. And if you take the diameter of the moon, it sums to 423, 2,160 miles. If you measure from this year's Super Bowl to September 12th of 2034, I'll explain why in a second, you get 4,230 days. So why did I measure to this eclipse, 2034? Well, first of all, there's a huge crown riddle with this game, and Charles III equals 234. So that's one reason. But check out the Saros number that goes with this eclipse in 2034. This eclipse belongs to Saros 135. And again, Aaron Rodgers equals 135. If you measure to this eclipse, it's also exactly 139 months. Green Bay equals 139. But what makes this so special is, well, also 2034, by the way, a rearrangement of the digits in 423. But here's the real kicker. The 2034 eclipse that we're measuring to passes over Peru. You see, this point of greatest eclipse is right off the coast of Peru. Earlier this year, before the season, Aaron Rodgers was all over the news because he went to Peru to take ayahuasca, which he says helped his career. And just a couple weeks ago, Aaron Rodgers' alleged girlfriend, Blue of Earth, was found to be stuck in Peru due to political unrest. Stuck in Peru. And how crazy is it that this year's Super Bowl aligns with the Peruvian eclipse, all with the numbers of Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay? All right. So I think that'll do it. We've been live for over 2 hours. I covered almost all of the riddles I could think of, connecting Green Bay and Minnesota to the Super Bowl this year. You know, when I first made the video, it was 70-1 for the Packers to go to the Super Bowl. Now it's 14-1. And if you had picked all 5 teams that the Packers, or all 5 games that the Packers needed to go their way last week, you would have increased your money 11-fold with the parlay. And again, I'm not trying to encourage everyone to bet. I'm just saying some of these riddles with sports games, especially for Super Bowl 57 in 2023, they're going to be part of something much, much larger. And you have to admit, these syncs with Vince Lombardi all the way through Aaron Rodgers, Lynn Dickey, Christian Watson, the name of the Jeopardy computer. This is some wild stuff. So if they pewter out now and fail to make the Super Bowl, well, it was all for nothing, right? But how can we say that? How can anyone claim to know that they know the numeric riddle for a game when something this powerful also exists? Not sure. All right, guys, so that'll do it. Thanks for watching. Peace, love, God bless. We'll be coming back with some more videos soon. I'm not going to be waiting 20 posts before I go live again, so I think for 2023, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge for me as I try to find the best way to spend my time. I love decoding, but I also love giving people the tools that they need to decode. And with what we're tapping into now with the Brown lunations and the Saros system, I feel very confident about not just predicting sports, but actually predicting the news. And maybe I shouldn't have even said that because this is game changer stuff that we're getting close to. And some of the time I've been spending on my own has been trying to kind of work this stuff out. And I have no question that we're going to make some very, very powerful leaps and bounds. So I'll leave it at that. All right. Once again, peace, love, God bless. I'll talk to you next time. See ya.